Река. А может океан. А бог его знает. Океан, наверное.
Залив океана. Маленький, в смысле, здесь река маленькая.
Да. Мы тут в Чарльстон собираемся на тур на кораблике. Народу море. В 11:30 будет тур. В общем, мы сейчас в Чарльстон собираемся на Charleston Historical Tour на корабле. Там какой-то мост. Тут народу очень много. Сейчас посмотрим, чем дело кончится. Народа море, не знаю, как они все втиснут.
That is St. Philip's Episcopal Church, and that is the oldest congregation here in South Carolina. The original church was built here in Charleston back in 1681, and unfortunately that church succumbed to fire, so the current church we're looking at right now was built there in 1838. The original church bells for that church were melted down and used as Confederate cannons during the Civil War, and then later on in the Civil War, when the Union Army and Navy was attempting to retake the city of Charleston, they used that church steeple as a reference point for aiming their cannons. And that was one of the first times in military history where a compass was used for aiming at a target. Now, to the left of that tall brown church steeple, we have a shorter white church steeple. It's kind of going behind our customs house right now, but it'll become a little bit more visible here in just a few seconds. That is St. Michael's Episcopal Church, and that is the oldest church building here in Charleston. That church opened up in 1761, and it has survived many natural disasters, including hurricanes, fires, tornadoes, and even a major earthquake in 1886. But that earthquake in 1886 did leave that white church steeple leaning about 4 degrees over to the right. So as we get a little more perpendicular with that white church steeple, you might be able to see how it's leaning about 4 degrees over to the right. Both George Washington and Robert E. Lee attended services at that church, and that church is located on the corner of Broad and Union Streets. And that area is known locally as the Four Corners of Law. And that's because down there we have the federal building, the state courthouse, City Hall, and then St. Michael's, which represents God's law. So it said if you go down there that you can get your mail, get married, get divorced, and go to jail, all in the same location. Right off to our right over here is Union Pier. This is home to our cruise ship terminal. There are plans to renovate this and get rid of some of these older warehouses and build a nicer, new, more modern cruise ship terminal. Cruise ships are not due to start leaving the port of Charleston again until at least 2022. But when they do dock up here, they normally dock at this building all the way at the end of the pier here, where you can see the blue tarp covering part of the building. Usually it's Carnival Cruise Lines that calls in on our harbor here. They do 2 cruises a week. Usually it's 5-day cruises down to Bermuda, Bahamas, and a few others in the downtown area. So there are 8 orangish colored umbrellas there on that back deck, and those are some of the most prized tables in all of Charleston. People wait hours and hours and hours just to sit on one of those 8 tables so they can have a little waterfront dining experience over there at Fleet Landing. All right, next thing up we have is this pier with this white flagpole at the end, and there's these 3 white roof gazebo buildings covering part of the pier. This is the mayor, Joe Riley Waterfront Club. Joe Riley was our mayor from 1975 all the way up to 2015, some 40 years as our mayor. So upon his retirement, the city council voted unanimously to name this park after him. There are 2 ground level fountains in the park. There is one right behind those 3 white roof gazebo buildings, and that could be a good one to run through on hot summer days if you want to try to cool yourself down like that in the city of Charleston. Although I will warn you that you have a sign in front of that that says no lifeguard on duty.
So, excuse me.
Actually drowning themselves in the fountain. 50 yards to the left of that fountain, along the shoreline, right in the gap in the palmetto trees there, we have the famous pineapple fountain in Charleston. And the pineapple is a symbol of hospitality here in Charleston. The way the pineapple became a symbol of hospitality is back in olden days when ship's captains would go out. They would try to gather up pineapples in their journey simply because it was kind of difficult to come by a pineapple here in Charleston. And then once they were home and well rested, they would put that pineapple out on their front porch. And that would signify to the local townspeople that it was okay to come over and discuss the captain's voyages and partake in the pineapple. Charleston has been voted as the friendliest city in the U.S. for the last 20 years, and it's also been voted the #1 destination to visit in the United States for the last 9 years. Although we did hear that one magazine has put Aspen, Colorado ahead of us. Next thing we're talking about here is this white cupola with a gray top roof just over the tree line. dungeon building. That's the last public building that was built by the British. That was completed in 1771. Initially, that served as a jail. It was actually a co-ed jail. They didn't separate the female and the male prisoners at all. And then later on during the Revolutionary War, the British started locking up some of our early Revolutionary War fighters over there. And then after that, it became a post office. Then it was a bank. During World War II, that was our Coast Guard station. Successfully navigate through our harbor. And this is a very prized job in the area, and that's because no container ship can enter our harbor without a pilot captain on board. So these guys can command an incredibly high salary. They usually get paid between $500,000 and $700,000 a year to cross someone else how to drive a boat. So unless you are related to someone who works over there, or you're married to one of the families of someone who works there, the chances of you getting a job as a pilot captain here in Charleston are just about zero. Next thing we're coming up on is a smaller marine over here. This is the Carolina Marina Yacht Club. This is one of the older and more prestigious yacht clubs in the area. This was first established in 1883, and there is currently a 25-year waiting list to become a member there. But I do hear if you're willing to make $125,000 donations then, that they will bump you up on that list just a little bit. Beyond the marina here, we have all these nice homes going down towards the point of Charleston Peninsula. That area is known as Battery Row. That's some of the more expensive real estate in the downtown area. Those homes were initially built by ship's captains, merchants, and plantation owners. You can tell the ship's captains' homes because they have those nice big wraparound porches on them. Those are sometimes referred to as widow's walks. That's because the wives of these captains would wander around those porches looking for their husband's hopeful safety terms. Most of the other porches out there all face out towards the southeast. That's because in the summertime here we have an incredibly reliable southeasterly sea breeze, so that served as an early form of air conditioning for our coast residents. Further down on the point of the peninsula there, you can see those nice live oak trees. That area is known as White Point Gardens, or the Battery. They first started calling that White Point Gardens because when the first settlers showed up here, they noticed that the local Native Americans were discarding their oyster shells on that point, and then the sun was bleaching those shells white, so they called the area White Point Gardens. Later on, it became known as the Battery for the battery of cannons that was placed there starting in the Revolutionary War, through the Civil War, and on up into World War II. And that's also one of the places where they used to hang pirates back in the day. We're going to talk a little bit more about pirates in just a few minutes. Up to about 16 years old, with these sailing lessons and getting involved in these races over here. And we've actually had a few local people here end up in the Olympics for sailing. So sailing is very big around here. They start out really young. Alright, so our man Jeff got our first trivia question. It is Edward Teach, so it's Blackbeard's real name, so he can get himself a free non-alcoholic drink or a snack from the Bell Cafe if you like. Alrighty guys, so kind of out in front of us and off to our right is James Island, and James Island is one of the many barrier islands that goes up and down the South Carolina coast. And back in the day, James Island was very famous for the indigo plantations they had over there back in the 1700s. And it was the Lucas family from Barbados.
Ну так оттуда не видно. Антон, иди сюда.
Indigo plant, you get a very cool dye. It's that blue color, the color indigo, and that has been prized for thousands of years.
Смотри, сколько здесь этих.
South Carolina got the color for its state flags for the indigo plantations that used to be located on the right over there. Alrighty guys, so now we're going to do our second trivia question, and then I'm going to work on navigating around all these sailboats and dinghies and everyone else who's following these guys. So our next trivia question is going to sound real easy, but it is actually our most difficult trivia question, and even when people cheat on this, they don't always get the answer right. But I am going to ask you where the first shot of the Civil War was fired from. And I will give you two hints. Number one, it was not Fort Sumter, and number two, the fort that did fire the first shot of the Civil War used to be located on this point of land. started getting a foothold back in this area over on Morris Island, which is once again off to our right where you see the lighthouse. Now, one of the regiments that was instrumental in helping us get a foothold over on Morris Island was the Massachusetts 54th. This is a very famous regiment in the Civil War. It's one of the earliest all African-American regiments in the Civil War. And they were depicted in the movie Glory, if you've ever seen that, with Denzel Washington and Matthew Broderick. They got involved in a battle over there, which was known as the Battle for Fort Wagner. Now, unfortunately, Fort Wagner has been completely retaken by the sea, so there is nothing of it left to see over there on Morris Island. But thanks to the Massachusetts 54th, and soon following that, Sherman's famous March to the Sea, the Union Army was able to get a pretty good foothold in the area, and then the Union Navy had the harbor blockaded. So then they started shelling the heck out of Fort Sumter in an attempt to retake this fort. And they fired about 40,000 shells at this fort over an 8-month period in an attempt to retake it. And this is why the fort is only 1 story right now instead of the 3 stories high it was at the beginning of the Civil War. Now, militarily, the Union Army and Navy was able to retake this fort in late February of 1865, but the official celebration for the retaking of Fort Sumter did not occur until April 14th of 1865. They wanted to invite a lot of dignitaries down here from all over the country. They brought Major Robert Anderson out of retirement to celebrate the retaking of the fort. And they even invited President Lincoln to come down here and celebrate the retaking of Fort Sumter, but he instead decided to attend a play at the Ford Theater that night where he was assassinated. So had President Lincoln come down here and partied with us, history might have been written a lot differently. So a few things to notice about the fort here as we get up a little bit closer. First of all, that black structure in the center of the fort was not there during the Civil War. That's called Battery Hugie, and that was placed there during the Spanish-American War in 1898, along with 2 additional 12-inch guns. If you look about 1/3 of the way up the flagpole, you're going to see a stripe painted around the flagpole. That indicates the original height of the fort when it was 3 stories high. Around the base of the fort, you're going to see a bunch of white squares. Those white squares are the original cannon ports. They have been bricked in now to protect the fort from the elements, but you just kind of have to picture this fort as 3 stories high with those cannon ports on all 3 levels. Now, the reason we know most of this information about Fort Sumter, especially about the early parts of the Civil War with the first battle here at Fort Sumter, is due to a person by the name of Abner Doubleday. He's credited with inventing the game of baseball, and he is also credited with firing the first shot in defense of Fort Sumter. So he wrote a pretty detailed account of what happened, and that's why we know all this history.